I've known Nancy Murray since the early 2000s, working together in various ways. So, for example, in 2004, a trip to Palestine, I wanted to get into Gaza, and I found maybe a way to go, but I was terrified. And I formed a cyber support committee, and Nancy was on that. So these were people online that I could consult with, and it made a big difference. Nancy is an activist, a writer, and a speaker. And I'd like to pause just for a moment because maybe millions of people are suffering now throughout that region and elsewhere. But especially I'm thinking of Palestine, Gaza, and the West Bank, and the Palestinians proper. And now let's add the Iranians. So in the Quaker tradition, the moment of silence, I asked us all just to pause for a moment, take 3 deep breaths. Nose for the in-breath, mouth for the out-breath. And then just pause after your 3 breaths and reflect on whatever way you put your attention on somebody else or something else. Just do that. Nancy has worked for Justice for Palestinians since 1988. She's made over 12 subsequent trips since then. She often leads tours there. And she has a BA from Harvard, a PhD in history from Oxford. She's taught at universities and prisons, worked on human rights issues in the UK and Kenya, as well as the US. She served for 25 years as education director at the ACLU, Massachusetts. More than 2 decades, she has been a president of the Gaza Mental Health Program Foundation, which raises money and does other good work for the Gaza Community Mental Health Program in Gaza itself, as you might guess. At our meeting, our congregation has made 2 very sizable donations to the foundation. She's married to Hubert Murray, who I don't see in the crowd, who is an architect, and he's been working in the Ida refugee camp of Bethlehem on kindergarten primarily, I think. Right. And I'm sure Nancy is very aware of the situation in the Ida camp. She wrote The Palestinians, Life Under Occupation, written several book chapters and articles on Israel-Palestine. And she's a member of, and I thought you were a founder or co-founder, of the Alliance for Water Justice. How many of you are here? Excellent. Wow.
And
some
people online are justice.
Okay. They, and I think it's primarily Nancy as a major writer, send out a bi-weekly notes or updates or briefs. Yeah, which are devastating in a way because it's usually pretty bad news, but it's also very encouraging to know what's happening and know where to put our attention. So I'm hopeful that part of the talk from both Leila and Nancy will be what to do. So it's a key question, and people have asked me in this talk series, will they say anything about that? And because both of them are activists, I'm sure they will. So, we have a timekeeper, Chris Jorgensen, 5 minutes and 1 minute. Is that okay? All right.
Great to see everybody. Thanks for coming. Am I talking loud enough?
Yes, you are. Good job.
A little bit louder. Okay, well, before I get started, if anyone wants to sign up for the biweekly brief and the other information, which is sent on a biweekly, sometimes weekly basis by the Alliance, I'll just pass this and just sign up your email. Please write as clearly as possible.
And also you can check off that you want to be announced about standouts and demonstrations if you want to participate in that.
Okay, well, it's wonderful being here. Thanks for that lunch. It's given me the energy to go ahead with this talk. I'm going to focus, which it sounds like you all are very familiar as a strip, and you know probably its size, only half the size, less than half the size of Cape Cod. Think of that when you imagine what it must have been like to be under the equivalent of 7 Hiroshima bombs in terms of TNT. This little strip of land, 25 miles long and 3 miles wide, which I first visited, as it said, in 1988 during the first Intifada, which was the unarmed civilian uprising of the entire society. Like the fact that it was people engaging in what we take for granted since the civil rights movement. You know, marches, boycotts, curfew, shutting down their shops, different ways of organizing non-violently. Despite this, over 1,000 Palestinians were killed and 100,000 arrested, and torture in prison was routine. So what I saw there really did change my life. And I came back determined to do what I could do to bring this to an end. What I saw was total dehumanization. Rabin, who at the time was defense minister, called for force, might, and beatings to put down the uprising. And I visited hospitals where there were young men in beds with their kneecaps deliberately shot into, totally beaten, you know, just all sorts of methods used to try to make them submit. And that was just the beginning of the attempt to shake off the Israeli occupation. And I guess if I could quickly just go through the chronology of what led up to 2023, because that context is so often left out when we hear about the genocide. So you had this terrible repression of the uprising. When I was there, I was in Jabalia refugee camp, which has now been totally destroyed. And on the walls, there was the graffiti of the united leadership of the uprising, the people who were organizing this. There was also graffiti that was green. No one quite knew where it came from. The Israeli army was making kids, young boys mainly, paint over the graffiti of the uprising, but they left that other graffiti. And I finally found someone who said, oh, that's this new group. It's called Hamas. And no one knew much about it. It had just been away from the Muslim Brotherhood and was establishing itself as a counterweight to the Palestinian Liberation Organization. So that was the first I had ever heard of Hamas, the first a lot of people there had ever heard of Hamas. But it was supported by Israel in the beginning as a way of having divide and rule. So Palestinians could not unite entirely against the occupation. So it's a long story, and I don't want to take up too much time with this part of it. But gradually, Hamas got stronger. The first suicide bombing was carried out after Barak Goldstein killed 29 Muslims at prayer in the Ibrahim Mosque. He was an American-born settler, lived in Hebron. After he killed 9 praying Muslims, very soon after, was when Hamas started using what we call terrorist tactics. And you all know, I'm sure, about how that bled into the second Intifada, which was not unarmed. It was an armed uprising. I went several times to the Gaza Strip during that period and saw how it was being suppressed very, very bloodily. In 2005, Israel removed its settlers from the Gaza Strip. Sharon, who did that, thought, okay, this would help us consolidate our hold over the West Bank so we would never, ever be forced to have a Palestinian state. They took away the settlers. I was there at the time. As soon as the settlers were gone, they started buzzing the Gaza Strip with drums. You would hear them, and with surveillance aircraft, and they would break the sound barrier, these aircraft. And people were really living in fear from those noises. And occasionally they would start dropping bombs. And that dropping of bombs became more than occasionally, became very frequent after the 2006 election, which was won by Hamas. It was a legislative election won by Hamas to protest really corruption in parts of the PLO. And people also looked at Hamas, which had started orphanages and hospitals and really created a social fabric of welfare for the population. And they thought, okay, maybe it will be. Well, that was 2006. Then the CIA decided we can't have this. This election, by the way, was witnessed by Jimmy Carter, who said it was fully fair and transparent. But the US and Israel decided it had to be over from the results. And that was in 2006, as a little civil war broke out between Hamas and what had been set up as the Palestinian Authority. And in 2007, Hamas took over the governance of the Gaza Strip. And it's at that point that Gaza was made totally locked down. Open air prison is what it was called by Human Rights Watch. So at that time, Israel would control every drop, every item of food that came in, who came in, who went out. It became much harder for me to enter, but I did manage to do it on a few occasions after the Gaza Strip was locked down. I managed to go there to witness the results of bombardments, military strikes, Operation Cast Lead, which you might remember, 2008 to 9. Then again in 2012, another military aggression in 2014. In 2021, 2022, there were these, what we would call little wars, basically killing thousands. I think a total all of those strikes was about 4,000 Palestinians. In 2018 and 19, there was an attempt to reproduce the unarmed, nonviolent activism of the first Intifada. It was called the Great March of Return. It ended up with hundreds being killed, 33,000 being wounded. They had snipers just picking up people. When they were gathering, they had brought picnics, they were having dances, all of this within this vicinity of Israel's wall. So they were just mowing down people. And this is the context for the attack by Hamas and Islamic Jihad on October 7th, 2023. This war, which our tax dollars subsidized, over $21 billion of our tax dollars went in weapons sales, etc., for this war. Not only did we subsidize it, I'm sure you all know how we have offered diplomatic support in the UN, always on the side of Israel. We basically stopped the United Nations from functioning. We really undermined international law. with our vetoes. Okay, so let's turn now. I know that there's been a lot of information that's reached you about the actual genocide, so I'm not going to talk about that. I want to switch to the so-called ceasefire, which was proclaimed on October 10th. It went into operation October 10th, 2025. So in early January 2026, Craig McIver, who is the former director of the New York office of the UN High Commission for Human Rights, he wrote about, quote, the dawning of a new age of impunity, which this Israel axis has declared to the world that a new order is born, one in which we all must bow to the empire or perish. And that is where we are today, thanks in large part to the failure of the international community. What do I mean, the failure? There were lots of resolutions passed by governments, lots of rhetoric, but the international community, not just the UN, but certainly the UN, never did utilize what it could have utilized, namely embargoes, sanctions, and the kinds of concrete actions which helped bring the apartheid regime in South Africa to an end. Now it is becoming increasingly apparent that Israel induced or tricked Trump to basically make war on Iran. And I think that my colleague Leila will be talking about that. But now, since then, under the cover war, what has happened in Gaza is off the front pages. It is out of most people's consciousness because there's so many other horrors to focus on. And it's something we really do need to pay attention to and to do something about. Let me just say one word about the war we're now engaged in. According to our Secretary of War, he really was, prescient when he said, let's call it that.
Yeah.
According to Pete Hegseth, he basically sees this as America's crusade.
Exactly.
And he told at the Pentagon press briefing on March 20th that, quote, the mullahs are desperate and scrambling. And he then recited Psalm 144, quote, blessed be the Lord, my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. And like many people in the government, our government today, and like the ambassador we have sent to Israel, he seems to be yearning for Armageddon to usher in the second coming of Christ. And this is really dangerous. So now let's turn back to Gaza. And I want to basically answer three questions briefly. First, what are the conditions like today under the sham ceasefire? Second, what is the Board of Peace? What does it look like? And what is the new colonial order being imposed on Gaza? And third, what future faces Gaza's residents under a double US-Israel occupation? And how are some Palestinians in Gaza seeing that future? So, for the first question, conditions. So you all are familiar, I'm sure, that this peace plan has different phases. Under the first phase that was implemented October 10, 2025, the living and dead Israeli hostages were returned. Over 1,800 Palestinian detainees and more than 300 dead Palestinians were handed over, many showing signs of systematic torture. In this phase, Israel withdrew its forces to behind what it called the yellow line, which, by the way, was not a line anyone could see. It was largely invisible, blocks here and there.
They had little barrels.
So behind the yellow line, basically Israel, with this yellow line, took at the time at least 53% of the Gaza Strip. Now it's up to 58%. They keep pushing the yellow line forward. And Gaza's residents are being crammed into less than half of what was long one of the most densely crowded places in the world. So since the ceasefire was announced, Israel has never stopped firing on Palestinians. The new genocidal total is down from 100 a day on average to more like 5 per day. And that is enough to get the world to turn its attention elsewhere. When Trump denied that Israel had been violating the ceasefire, in its first 4 months, according to Al Jazeera, Israel had violated it some 1,600 times. And for Palestinians, approaching this largely invisible yellow line could be a death sentence. You get near it whether you're a little kid collecting firewood or a family just basically in their car driving too close to it, could be targeted immediately for death. The number of Palestinians killed by Israeli troops in Gaza since the start of the ceasefire is now more than 670. This is according to the Ministry of Health figures. So in phase 1, Israel was also supposed to flood the Gaza Strip with food. But instead of the promised 600 trucks of humanitarian aid, there have been about a third that number, with many of the items being sold in markets at prices few Gazans can afford. Fuel and clean water are in short supply, and many people were reduced to eating 1 meal a day. That's even less since the war on Iran began. The rented encampments, where 40% of Palestinians live, have been repeatedly flooded, and dozens of children, a dozen, not dozens, 12, a dozen children have died of cold as winter storms have destroyed their flimsy tents. Now, once the body of the last Israeli hostage was located and returned home in late January, Trump announced that phase 2 of the peace plan had begun. And during that phase, Hamas was supposed to disarm. It has not done so, saying it never agreed to this part of the plan and would only hand over its weapons to Palestinian representatives. However, it is currently engaged in negotiations in Cairo. Reportedly, I don't know if these are direct or indirect, but it's negotiating with an aide to Steve Witkoff, Aryeh Lightstone. So we don't know how that's going. In this second phase, Palestinians are supposed to be able to leave the Gaza Strip and return through the Rafah crossing. That's the crossing with Egypt. But only a fraction of the promised 50 people a day have been able to leave for urgently needed medical care, and fewer have been able to return. Getting into Gaza has been a nightmare. People subjected. So if they go out, say, accompanying a relative to a hospital, when they try to come back in, this is what they face. They're subjected to repeated screenings at checkpoints, which could take an entire day. Some have been beaten, robbed of their money by the Israeli-backed Al-Shabaab militia. This is a militia Israel is supporting to fight against Hamas. So they're subjected to beatings and humiliations before being interrogated by the Israeli army, and more threats. I mean, really terrible stories of trying to get back into Gaza. The Rafah crossing and all the other crossings into Gaza were slammed shut on February 28th, when the war on Iran began. Humanitarian aid dropped immediately, 80% since the start of the war, the Iran war. Fuel, humanitarian aid, stocks and basic food that in markets were rapidly depleted, and prices soared, as you can imagine, and the fear of famine returned. On March 4th, reportedly under US pressure, Israel reopened the Karim Shalom crossing, on a very limited basis, allowing in some more supplies. The Rafah crossing into Egypt remained shut until March 19th, when it reopened to allow just 8 of the several thousand patients urgently requiring medical care to travel to hospitals outside the Gaza Strip. So, and the state of medical care is really dire. Some 1,800 Palestinians in Gaza have been wounded since the ceasefire began.
What's the next?
1,000, well, it's 1,790, but I didn't look at today, so it goes up all the time. So say approximately 1,800. Meantime, the hospitals are struggling to operate with intermittent electricity and fuel, minimal medical supplies, while Israel has blocked the entry of generators necessary to keep hospitals running. In the words of the International Middle East Media Center, quote, "For families in Gaza, survival now extends far beyond the immediate threat of bombardment. It has become a daily struggle to navigate a landscape where homes, infrastructure, and community life have been systematically torn apart with no clear path to recovery." End quote. So that's conditions. Let's turn now to the Board of Peace. First thing to know is that it is not a UN agency, even though on November 17, 2025, the Security Council unanimously endorsed it under Trump's chairmanship. Now, this was a catastrophe. That was one of the worst things the Security Council has ever done, because it basically, with China and Russia abstaining, it endorsed setting this thing up apart from the UN. It's fully independent under Trump's chairmanship. They thought this peace plan was supposed to last 3 years, and they thought it was supposed to be for Gaza. Turned out to be a little different. So according to Palestinian refugee group Radil, quote, "Resolution 2803, that's the resolution that they passed, is a blueprint for managing Palestinians through foreign authority and colonial tutelage, trying to erase genocide from global memory and entrenching the Israeli regime's colonial apartheid under an international framework." Essentially,
Is that the exact language of it?
yeah, that was a quote. Well, that's a quote from the deal.
Oh, from the deal. It's like,
Resolution 2803 essentially discards the Palestinian right to self-determination. It is a mechanism to basically put Gaza under a new form of colonial tutelage, and it's up to Trump to say what gives, what goes, what happens, and when. By the time Trump called, quote, this is what he called it, "the greatest strategy and most prestigious board ever assembled at any time, any place
In the history of the world.
By the time that was publicly launched at the World Economic Forum in Davos on January 22nd, 2026, it had become clear that he intended it to have a global reach and be an alternative to the UN. In its charter, there is no mention of Gaza. Nor is there a mention that it's only lasting for 3 years, which is what the UN had voted for. Now, as conceived in the charter, it would be dissolved only when Trump decided to end it. He is the final authority on all board matters, and he can serve for life.
Okay.
the board.
The Board of Orwellian.
Really?
Right.
You're doing
All
great,
right.
Nancy. I
No,
appreciate it.
I'm talking too slow. Okay, so clearly I'm talking too slow. Under its hierarchical structure, there are 2 executive boards, One is for Gaza, made up of all of Trump's appointees and billionaire friends, Marco Rubio, Tony Blair, Jared Kushner, Witkoff, Susie Wiles, among others. There's supposed to be an international stabilization force, which will move into a 350-acre site, a military base, ringed by watchtowers and barbed wire to be built in southern Gaza. And at the bottom of this bureaucratic hierarchy is the 15-member Palestinian Technocratic Committee that is supposed to be an administrative government for Gaza, but has not yet been allowed to enter the Gaza Strip.
Right.
So what future awaits Gaza under the Board of Peace? In Davos and during its first meeting at the Donald J. Trump U.S. Institute of Peace on February 19, Kushner and other billionaires put a spotlight on the investment opportunities in the quote, new Gaza, where glitzy, futuristic towers, data centers, coastal tourist facilities are being planned to transform the vast graveyard that the Gaza Strip has become into a riviera of the Middle East. Miles offshore, natural gas platforms will fuel Gaza's economy. And interestingly enough, the plan for New Gaza does not use the word Palestinians. It refers to people, those who regard Gaza as their home and place of residence. That's a quote. Which means this could include the non-Palestinians who once lived there in Israel's illegal settlements that were removed in 2005. With Israeli settlers now claiming that Gaza belongs to them and pushing for its recolonization, Israel appears to be digging in to stay on its side, east of the Yellow Line, which includes the best agricultural land. And in addition to systematically destroying all the houses and buildings in that area, Israel has built some 13 military installations and roads connecting that territory to Israel. So the expulsion of Gaza, I'm sure you know, and its residents has long been Netanyahu's priority, but workers are needed to build the new Gaza. And according to leaked documents obtained by Drop Site News, heavily screened Palestinians who will be permitted to live in the new Gaza will on a daily basis be subjected to extensive surveillance apparatus that will include monitoring not just their movements and communications, but all their financial transactions through Israeli-controlled electronic wallets that will replace the cash-based economy. As for Palestinians west of the Yellow Line who don't see fit material for the de-radicalization that the Board of Peace says it will undertake, they could be crammed into smaller and smaller spaces, denied sufficient food, and eventually killed or forced to leave. So it's hard to imagine the humanitarian situation becoming even more dire, but the Israeli High Court is now considering whether the 37 experienced international humanitarian organizations banned by the government for not turning over information about their local staff can indeed be forced to cease operations. This includes Oxfam, by the way. With the international press locked out of Gaza, with members of the local press systematically murdered, and international organizations like UNRWA, those international organizations have been crucial eyewitnesses to Israeli atrocities, as well as responsible for food distribution. But if the court decides these organizations should be shut down, that would leave humanitarian operations to 27 approved organizations, several of which belong to the Israeli-based umbrella organization for evangelical Christian charities that have a history of working with the Israeli army. So you all know that Gaza has been a lab for the testing of weapons. Under Board of Peace rule, it might become a lab for how to control a marginalized, unwanted population. We have to make sure this does not happen, building on connections that expose the threats that might makes right militarism, racist dehumanization, and AI surveillance present to rights that are supposed to be protected by the US Constitution and international law. Now, I would say more, but I'm running out of time about how the Gazans I know see their future. But let me just say, I want to end on a more optimistic note. Personal note. So during my trip in 1988, I met the first psychiatrist in the Gaza Strip, Ian al-Sarraj, who made a real breakthrough in overcoming the stigma with which mental health was regarded by stressing the connection of mental health and human rights. Elaine Hagopian and I founded Gaza Mental Health Foundation in 2001 to support work he was doing at the Gaza Community Mental Health Program, as Skip said. And I have been amazed how its staff, numbering nearly 100, has continued to work during the genocide, even as their headquarters, clinics were destroyed, their homes bombed, and they lost family members. In their report on their activities in 2025, its current head, Dr. Yasser Abu-Jameh, wrote that, quote, "Through our efforts, we have seen the resilience of the human spirit. Children who had lost their ability to play, speak, or express themselves are beginning to find their voices again. Families who are overwhelmed by despair are receiving support to cope with trauma. Reality is clear. Our impact will remain limited until peace returns. Food reaches every household and the ruins of war. So the way they are endeavoring to keep hope alive among such tremendous odds has been an inspiration to me. But I recognize the huge effort that lies ahead for all of us if there is ever to be real peace in the region and an end to Israel's occupation, the sham ceasefire prevailing today. We cannot forget Palestine. And with genocide now being normalized, we must build our collective strength to confront the barbarism that threatens us all. Thank you.
If you're looking for something to do about the situation, you might consider making donations to various organizations. The Mental Health Foundation is one. We have more information about recommended donees, that is people you can donate to, back on the table. I'd like to recognize a very special person who was at the original attempt to not only see my photographs, but hear from 3 Palestinians. We then were shut out completely by pro-Israel zealots. Renew the program right here, October 2023, I think. And the 3 speakers that had been scheduled in Luton were able to tell their stories about the Nakba. So, Hanny, right, there he is, yes. Thank you, Hanny. If he's around, you can talk with him later. Leila Farsakh, the scholar and author, teacher, and an activist. Born in Jordan, she's Palestinian, a political economist, full professor and chair of the Department of Political Science at UMass Boston. She teaches Middle East politics, the Arab-Israeli conflict, theories of the state, and comparative politics. Among several books, she has written Rethinking Statehood in Palestine, Self-Determination and Decolonization Beyond Beyond Partition. She's frequently interviewed by the media. She's a member of the campaign, which if you're interested in a final, in a better solution than 2 states, or type of 1 state that's dominated by Israel. You might want to look into this one Democratic State campaign. She's a regular participant in gatherings where Palestinians discuss prospects for the future. I hope you refer to that, hearing from Palestinians about the situation. She's project, I don't know if this is still current, project co-director for Jerusalem 2050, a problem-solving project jointly sponsored by MIT's Department of Urban Studies and Planning and the Center for International Studies. In 2001, she won Cambridge's award. She's a member of Resist. Some of you may be familiar with that. They fund various resistance actions. She made a recent trip to Doha, our capital of Qatar, and maybe you can refer, because I think many of us are interested in conversations from Palestinians. He was one of the first speakers in our series here. It was in the, I don't know if you remember that, the 2003 or 4. And trees and help everybody get some olives that were here today. And to quote her, finally, passion has always been to analyze the dynamics of power in its multiple facets and to advance the struggles for justice.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Skip. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you, Nancy. It's always very difficult to come after you. I always learn so much from you. I will try not to be long because I'm sure you want to ask questions. And what I will do is continue from where Nancy stopped. So basically, talk a little bit about how the Trump plan is going to impact the West Bank and how this war is the latest war, is going to impact Palestine, and what do the Palestinians think, how we're going to get out of this mess. So as Nancy explained, the Trump plan is nothing but an attempt to continue the genocide on a slow pace with little scrutiny from the international community or the world press. It is an attempt to eliminate, in my view, and I think also in her view, the role of the United Nations in Palestine as a prelude to eliminate the role of the UN globally. Specifically, the Trump plan is trying to strip the Palestinian cause of its political content. Namely, that it is a struggle for self-determination, for independence and return, and not being a humanitarian problem that requires new solutions. These new solutions, these humanitarian solutions, are no longer based on aid or the United Nations, but on real estate development, as Nancy described, real estate development projects financed by American and regional capital, generating new mechanisms of colonial control that enable Israel to continue to dispossess and displace the Palestinians and survey them with new technologies. In my presentation today, I will do three things. First, I will describe how the Trump plan and the Board of Peace, launched in 2006, represent the last phase in Israel's plan to annex the West Bank. Secondly, I will discuss the implication of the US-Israel war on Iran for the Palestinian cause and for the Middle East. We are now in week 4 of this war, and it is far from clear when it will be over, even if we already can feel its economic cost, and it will have major political implications. This is history in the making, guys. Third, I will explain how, or review a little bit with you, how the Palestinians see the road ahead after 3 years of genocide, ethnic cleansing, and this war. So, the first point. Do you remember what it was?
No.
Tomorrow I'm teaching at 8 o'clock in the morning. So, okay, so the first point was, yeah.
Look at that hair. Look at the hair.
Okay, so far as the situation in the West Bank is concerned, the Trump plan is enabling Israel to finalize the final stage of its annexation into the Jewish state, one that Menachem Begin, Israel's prime minister in 1978, promised he will do as the price for returning Sinai to Egypt by signing the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty. He said that the price for signing the Egyptian-Israeli peace treaty in 1973-39 was to
hold the West Bank to prevent the establishment of any Palestinian state. Referring to the West Bank already then as Judea and Samaria, Israeli government built over 123 settlements by 1993, which is when the peace process started, and had over 250,000 settlers. During the peace process and the US-sponsored roadmap to peace in 2003, that called for the establishment of a Palestinian state as the only means to solve the conflict, Israel tripled the Israeli settler population, and we had a total of 720,000 in 2023. So the October 7th attacks provided the excuse for Israel to finalize the final stage of annexing 60% of the West Bank, i.e. Area C, despite the international recognition of the Palestinian state by over 156 states, including Britain, who was the origin of the problem with the Balfour Declaration, and France, another superpower at the time, and also another member of the Security Council. Trump Land and Board of Peace provide the superpower endorsement of this annexation of the West Bank. In the words of Hagar Shezaf from Haaretz, and I'm quoting, the West Bank is being sacrificed on the altar of the US President Donald Trump's plan for Gaza and the changing world order. And we can see that how the West Bank is being sacrificed for, in three main ways. First, the Trump plan does not mention the West Bank at all, nor the settlements, nor the illegality of the settlers, nor international law, nor the fact that the genocide war is going on in Gaza. Israel was expelled 36,000 Palestinian refugees in Nur Shams and Jenin refugee camp and destroyed Nur Shams. Okay. Since October 7th, settlers' violence has surged as over 1,400 settler attacks were recorded on Palestinian children, homes, and agricultural land. Supported by the armies, the settlers, there is a record of the settlers were able to build 86 new outposts, have been herding and chasing away Palestinian farmers and shepherds, and causing them to leave the area. According to B'Tselem, 21 Palestinian communities were fully or partially uprooted in 2025 as a result of the settler and state-backed violence. 86 communities. On December 11, 2025, okay, after the declaration of Trump's plan, after the announcement of Trump's plan, Israel's Security Cabinet approved the establishment of 19 new settlements. The total official number of settlements to 210 settlements, hosting 750,000 settlers. Okay? 250,000. We're talking about three quarters of a million settlers in the West Bank among 3 million Palestinians. So that's around 80%. The last war in Iran, Israel has locked the West Bank with new roads closures, iron gates, checkpoints, and largely prevented Palestinians from entering Jerusalem during the month of Ramadan. Settlers have set on fire Palestinian villages and property and destroyed water cisterns. And soldiers have cut pipelines supplying water to towns and villages and intensified the raids on Palestinian communities with a total of 623 Palestinians arrested in the first 3 weeks of this war. So that's what's happening. That's the first thing. Secondly, what Israel is doing to annex the West Bank. Israeli government has expanded its land annexation of the West Bank by approving in December 2025 the annexation of Area E1 in the West Bank, east of Jerusalem. And the Israel's Land Authority published tender for 3,400 housing units in it. This expands the illegal settlement of Ma'ali Adumim, if many of you visited, I assume, creating a continuum within the occupied East Jerusalem that finalizes the severing of the north of the West Bank from the south of the West Bank, okay? Rupturing the urban Palestinian continuity between Ramallah, East Jerusalem, and Bethlehem. Moreover, on January 5th, 2026, 2 months ago, the Israeli civil administration designated 694 dunams as belonging to Palestinian towns in north of the West Bank as state land, which facilitates its appropriation. It also introduced new theories to expand land expansion by repealing the Jordanian law that was still in force and allowing settlers for the first time to purchase land without oversights. by the civil administration, as well as the Israeli Authority started new enforcement powers in archaeological sites in areas A and B that in principle are under Palestinian control. Thirdly, and maybe most alarmingly, but this is how you seal the annexation, Israel is changing and normalizing its control of the West Bank by transferring key authorities from the military to the civil authorities. This can be seen in the decision to transfer the power of land registration in the West Bank from the military civil administration to the Israel's Minister of Justice, which is usually in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem, okay? And appointing settlers rather than army officers from Tel Aviv or Central Israel in key West Bank administrative positions. Israel is also withdrawing from the Palestinian Authority, withholding funds and fragmenting it further, thereby weakening any measure of control that whatever Palestinian Authority had on the population of the West Bank. This is happening while Israel continues to pound the Gaza Strip, control 60% of its land, and now is invading Lebanon as well as attacking Iran. One can argue that this war in Iran is meant to ensure the annexation of the West Bank and the displacement of Palestinians continues while no one is paying attention, and also while forcing Jordan and Egypt to de facto accept this annexation to avoid being attacked by Iran. This brings me to the second point, which of course by now you have forgot, but I'll remind you. This brings me to the regional implication of the genocide, the Trump plan, and the war on Iran. This war in Iran is a war that Netanyahu has always wanted because he wants to assure that Israel is the only hegemon in the region and doesn't want any counterpower to it. War could not have been possible without the genocide on Gaza and the Trump plan. It is like nothing the region has known since 1973, and thank God some of you were old enough to remember the war of 1973 and prices of oil going up. Yeah, it changed completely the Middle East. It changed all the US. It brought the down Carter administration. We can go on and on and on. Okay, so Israel wants to be the only state with the right to security and the right to defend itself and to dictate the engagement of any other country in the region. It is pursuing a strategy of divide and conquer. It's invading Lebanon and invaded Lebanon, but displaced so far 1 million people. And is applying what is called now the Gaza doctrine on South Lebanon, meaning it is everything. Today, actually, it bombarded all the bridges over Al-Litani River to confirm that everything south of Al-Litani was under Israel's control. We're talking about 20 kilometers. Israel is though facing stronger resistance from Hezbollah than expected. Its mantra is that it went there to eliminate Hezbollah. I would say good luck with that, because oppression brings more oppression, more resistance. But Israel is also bombarding Beirut and is showing instability despite the Lebanese government's repeated call to directly negotiate with Israel to reach a ceasefire, which is a new thing. Lebanon never wanted to have direct negotiation. Now saying, let's have a ceasefire. Israel said, I'm not interested. Israel is also seeking to destroy Iran's military capability and forcing everyone into normalizing with Israel. Its ability to do so, though, is far from certain because Iran is a country of 93 million. And the people in the Gulf states, after nearly now we're at week 4, are becoming aware of how limited are the US military bases that they have installed, in their countries from protecting them. It is clear that the US priority is Israel, not the Gulf states, and I can tell you many Gulf states and above all people are very angry at that. While Saudi Arabia might want to weaken Iran and is probably now very angry at Iran for the fact that the war is continuing, for the attack on military bases, for the attack on desalination plants and or refineries, I don't think Iran is willing. Iran is not willing to accept Israel as the only hegemon in the region. Economic and environmental repercussions of this war are starting to be felt. We know that over 30 oil depots have been targeted and water desalination plants in Iran and the Gulf states. A war of attrition is actually what might end up happening. A Russia-Ukrainian scenario, given Iran's control of the Hormuz Strait, where 20% of all world oil passes through. And apparently taking over this strait is not easy because the water is shallow. So, and Iran can attack and any cargoes going through it. Okay, so Iran, in other words, is showing the world that it can inflict serious economic costs on the world and itself, so long as this war continues. The cost of the war so far for the US is estimated at $2 billion a day, so you can calculate that. And if you heard, as Trump has asked, or Texas has asked for $20 billion more. 250 I have $200 billion. We are heading towards an economy of stagnation and inflation if this war does not stop soon. This war is also changing the region in ways that the 1948 war changed it, albeit in a new and regional international context. So how so? In 1948, the creation of the State of Israel was a big shock to the whole Middle East region, as you can imagine. Within 4 years of Israel's creation, we had a major coup d'etat in Egypt that brought to power Abdel Nasser, and the army came to power, was very nationalistic. You had a number of coup d'etat in Syria, and then within 10 years, you had also a major military coup d'etat in Iraq that brought nationalist military leaders that maintained that their position was we need to strengthen the state, we need to defeat Israel, and we need to build our countries. Okay. Today, the situation is a bit different insofar that the Middle East countries, which were typically the weights, like Egypt and Syria, are much weaker. The new arbitrators and regional actors is the Gulf. Saudi Arabia is the broker in Syria. United Arab Emirates is creating havoc all over the Middle East and also in Yemen, in Sudan. So they are the new power broker, but this war has shown also how fragile their power is. And I think also there's another generational shift, like in 1948, the generational shift in 1948 did not accept that defeat and rebelled against it within 4 years or 10 years. And I think now also in the Gulf, the whole generation of Gulfi, Emirati, Saudi generation who are far more educated than they were 30 years ago. And like every educated and every person is concerned about not only just their security, but also their pride and their future. And they see that there is no future with the United States. Okay. So that's where we have a point of instability that we don't know where it's going to go. But also what we see, and I think this became very clear, that the region can never be safe and quiet without solving the Palestinian problem. So whereas the Oslo peace process tried to take the Palestine out of its regional context and say this is a problem to be solved between Israel and the Palestinian, the genocide, and in particular this war on Iran, made it clear to everybody that nobody in the Gulf states or anywhere will be safe if Palestinians are lost. So I think this is becoming more, and it became that you cannot solve Palestine without solving the region, and you cannot have security in the region if you don't solve Palestine. So this brings me to what can the Palestinians do in this context. And here I would like to say a number of things. I know we always think of the catastrophe, and it is pretty bad. I'm not trying to minimize that. I'd like just a little bit to review what we have achieved, and is it really true that the Palestinians will be eliminated and forgotten? And I will start by telling you, as a Palestinian born after another war, which was the 1967 war, I'll tell you the Palestinians are not vanishing. And you, more than anybody else, can testify to that, because you know very well how it was hard 40 or 50 years ago to talk about the Palestinians. 40 years ago, the Palestinians were a bunch of terrorists. Who are the Palestinians? Okay. They became a bunch of terrorists, right? And then when the peace process was signed, there are some good Palestinians and there are some bad Palestinians, there are more bad Palestinians, right? And then Hamas, we try to portray them as all terrorists. Well, guess what? Despite the genocide, people have heard people from Gaza, have heard women from Gaza, who speak very good English, who know how to address the West. We are not like in 48 where not everybody was feeling guilty in the West, was feeling guilty towards what happened in the Holocaust and did not care about the indigenous people. We are in a context where the Palestinians have made their voice very clear, where they created alliance, where you are very aware and you made Palestine visible. You went and saw it, you went and heard it. Everybody is aware that Palestine exists and the Palestinians exist and the Palestinians are facing injustice. and they have a rightful struggle. And also, the world recognizes that Israel is a settler colonial state.
That's right.
In the 50s or 60s, 70s, in the Middle East, we talked always of Israel as settler colonial state. This language vanished, okay? But now the West, everybody says Israel is settler colonial state. And even Israelis say, yeah, okay, we are a settler colonial, we are a colonial state. They don't say this. We are a colonial state, but so what? The Nakba is bad, the Holocaust is worse, we need a home. Okay. I think people are beyond this exclusionary idea of your violence justifies my violence or your suffering is greater than my suffering. I think all this is finally being, being seen in much more analytical terms. So what I have to confirm to you, the Palestinians are here to stay. They're not going anywhere. Israel would try to eliminate them. That's true. I think Israel is a much worse situation than we are. We are in a bad situation from a humanitarian point of view and also from a political point of view, because we've never had such a decimated, this is wrong. We've never had such a bad leadership in the Palestinian Authority. But if you look at the history of the Palestinian struggle, the target has always been the leadership. Always. And the people have been more advanced than the leadership, but because the leadership has always been stuck, because the odds were always against us. Okay? But again, I get inspiration from Gaza, because if Gaza, who has been under siege for 18 years, who had poverty rate before 2023, that had poverty rate of 80%, unemployment of 45%, and still produced these kinds of schools, these kinds of universities, these kinds of people who speak and explain and argue and defend, that means we are here to stay. Okay? It doesn't mean that we don't have work to do. It just means that we are here to stay. Okay, so that's the one point. Sumud, we're very good at doing sumud. It gets tiring to do sumud, but I don't think you have a choice. Okay, so the second point becomes how to emphasize the rights approach. That's where the Palestinians are in now. Okay, and the point about the state. Okay, so I am of the opinion that the Palestinian pursuit of a state was not a waste of time. Okay, the Palestinian pursuit of a state was important because it affirmed the political presence of the Palestinians. They are not just a bunch of refugees in need of a humanitarian solution. They are the people with the right to self-determination. And as I said, the fact that now 157 states recognize Palestine is maybe this is the biggest confirmation that there is something called Palestine. I remember when I first came here, remember 25 years ago, people did not talk about Palestine, right? Now everyone talks about Palestine like it exists. Nobody can. Israel also was intelligent and said, okay, fine, I'll recognize the Palestinian, but I'll take away from them everything. But it's still important for Palestinians to exist. But what I want to say also that the role of the Palestinian state did its job. Its job was not to achieve independence as we had thought. Its job was to affirm Palestinian existence.
Yeah.
So now we achieved that. People know we exist. People know that there is a state that will not allow the Palestinians to exist. They know that there cannot be a viable state, okay? Because Israel has eliminated anything about it. So now we don't have a Palestinian state, but we have a Palestinian people. We have 7 million Palestinians living still in the area that Israel controls from the river to the sea. And we have 7 million Israelis as well living in that. Living in that land. So how can we move forward? I think Israel, this is why the Palestinians are focusing on the rights, which is the right to self-determination, right to life, right to. I think what's very important is to emphasize the importance of international law, especially at this time when international law is so much under assault. That's the only vehicle we have. So we need to uphold it. And if you want, from a realist point of view, there are other countries who want to uphold it, particularly China. And China is the rising power. So don't worry very much about America not wanting to apply it. Other countries still want to apply it because it's convenient, not because they love law, okay? Because it's better for business, okay? Emphasize apartheid analogy. Apartheid, because the apartheid analogy has been legitimized and we've been using it for the past 20 years. We have legal measures to apply it, okay? And sanctions. We cannot move forward, whether it is 2 state, 3 state, no state, you can do nothing without sanctions. And you have enough argument for the sanctions. The ICJ ruling of 2024 was very important to emphasize the illegality of the occupation and basically calling on third countries not to sanction Israel for its violation of international law. We should emphasize on that. Yes. Now the third point is the Palestinian agency. Where is Palestinian agency in this? All this. The Trump plan, as Nancy nicely pointed out, wants to eliminate Palestinian agency. Guess what? It's nothing new. We've been there before. 1948, there were no Palestinians, they were just Arabs. 1967, we have a very important UN resolution 242, does not mention the Palestinian. No Palestinian, they were just a bunch of refugees, we need to find a solution to that, okay? The Palestinians asserted themselves, how? With the PLO, which was created in 1964, and which the revolutionary, at the time they were revolutionary, took it over in 1968, okay? So today, the Palestinians are facing the same questions. What do we do? How do we reclaim our agency again? Now that Hamas has been eliminated, we don't know exactly, but weakened. Now that the PLO has been marginalized by the Palestinian Authority. Now that the Palestinian Authority is a bunch of old men who don't know what the hell they're doing, okay? Or want just to make money, okay? It happens before, okay? So the debate among the Palestinians is we need to reform the PLO, and I think it's going to happen because, again, there's a new generation coming. Now, the fourth point is, okay, what is the political program moving forward? Is it one state, two state, no states? I don't have much time to talk about that. Maybe we'll discuss it in the question of answer, but I can tell you from the Palestinians on the land in West Bank and Gaza, nobody wants to see any Israeli, but also nobody believes in a two-state solution. Okay, it's done. This has been tried, it's over. So you can have the just one-state solution, which would imply a binational state, where everybody who lives on the land have equal rights and they're equal, and that means you have to create a new constitution, you have to do a truth and reconciliation committee, that lots of work. But also, and here I will, don't be surprised if in a year or two, maybe 3, start people talking about creating a confederation between Israel and Palestine. Yes. This is more likely to happen because it's the only way how you can square the fact that you don't have a two-state solution on the ground, but you have a two-state solution in recognition. The question would be, again, the devil in the details. But the one-state reality is what we have, and the core question is how we're going to democratize this one-state reality. How do we turn from an apartheid into a democratic state? And this is the phase we are in now. And your role in it, to have this course, first of all, finance the Gaza mental health. I think we will need so much help mentally because other traumas are coming. Sanctions. Use U.S. law to uphold the Leahy laws, to force, and like we did with South Africa, go for expansion, divestment, and boycott. And yeah, the story continues. So thank you very much.